actually use the functional theory in the
Okay. So for this new theory, since the central point of the theory is how children are being socialized, then which in itself is not giving you much that is original to work with, because I think we all recognize that folktales and folklore do that work. They do the work of socializing children into certain kinds of logics of the community. But what would be interesting, so again, nailing down to what would be fresh about your project, would be to think about a thematic concern in this community around how they socialize people, and then maybe combine that with a topic that would then give it more punch and more originality. And again, I don't know the material, and I don't work on folklore, so I'm a bit I'm going on a limb here. But for instance, it would be interesting to see less, so most of the work on folklore has been about morality, about right and wrong, do not steal, all these things. But what would be interesting is to distill through that material and see, for instance, does some of that material say interesting things about what it means to be a man, for instance?
Yeah, actually, Prof, I taught along. That was actually the original idea I had. I wanted to look at gender, how gender is presented, both masculinity and then the feminine and the femininity.
Yes.
Then to see if at the end of the day I'll be able to strike a balance. But on the second thought, I felt, well, gender is an overflowed area.
Yes.
Then you come out from there, so so I'm confused.
That's true. And but I was giving that as an example, and you're very right that gender is a bit it's really overtrodden. So something else I would be interested in, for instance, which will sound strange, but it's ideas on wealth. Like, do some of these short stories talk to questions of wealth, for instance, or economics? What do they teach children about wealth formation and about, and here I'm going there because if you think about, for instance, and we've all in the room, I'm sure we've all read Things Fall Apart, and we all remember the story of the tortoise and the party that the birds were invited to the party in heaven. Yes. So I think there's something about that story that speaks to questions of accumulation and wealth. Even though we know it's not framed like that in the context of Things Fall Apart, but one can think about. So that's just a random example, and it doesn't have to, you don't have to go with that. But what I'm pointing you towards is go back to your data and look for what is unique and distinct about these short stories, and then tie that to your theory, bearing in mind that your theory is around socialization, and then reframe that as the core of your project. Because in that way, somebody looking at it will be able to see, oh, wait a minute, this is something new about folklore. Because unfortunately, folklore, there's been a lot of work that's been done on folklore, and that's not the same as saying it's not important, but it is to say we need to take it seriously enough to ask new questions about it. And to make or to take it forward, to take the scholarship forward into a completely sort of fresh and interesting direction. But currently, your project it's still very broad, because your title is An African Worldview in Folktales. So an African worldview of what? You see, it's very broad. I think this is an example of what Prof was saying earlier. So, but I think you're well placed to really narrow it down, then to tie it to your proposal and make it work for you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so is there any question, or does that make sense somewhere?
This makes a lot of sense.
And, okay.
I will work on it.
Okay. Okay, super. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No, you're most welcome. Okay, so who's our third speaker? I don't recall my order earlier, so I'll just ask the person to speak.
Rejoice, Songden.
Okay, okay, super. Hi, Rejoice. Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, Prof.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my initial topic, the topic is for the proposal is charting a new course for the new generation of post-colonial writers. And the sociopolitical concerns that I raised in this project are exclusively the prevailing issues in Africa and perhaps the world at large. I have looked at the perspectives of the works of three authors, Chinua Achebe, Festus Iyai, and Helen Habila. What I have done in this initial proposal is to pick these authors. There are 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria, and there are peculiar problems all over the 6 geopolitical zones. Now, writers have delved into writings and they have brought out several issues. They have approached them through different perspectives. Now, these 3 authors represent 3 geopolitical zones. Achebe from the eastern part of Nigeria, Festus Iyai from the South-South region, and then Helen Habila representing the North Central. Now, I looked at what they have done. They have all done they have done a critique of the sociopolitical problems, as at the same time proffered certain solutions to the problems. Now, each of them also belong to 3 generations of writers according to the isolation. The scholars have isolated periods of writings into the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd generation. Now, Achebe represents the 1st generation, Festus Iyai representing the 2nd, and Helen Habila the 3rd generation of writers. Now, I have picked these people, these artists, to be able to see how the perspectives that each of them have used to project the sociopolitical problems in Nigeria. Now, having gone through the comments you made, I have observed also that the topic is broad. It's charting a new course for the new generation of writers. Initially, what I wanted to look at is to see how those people have produced their literature and the continuity other writers are going to take, how they're going to take over from these writers. Are they complying to these sociopolitical problems? Because indeed, the same kind of problems we have in the 1st generation, we have in the 2nd, we equally have in the 3rd generation of writers. So that if we're putting it that way, it looks like charting a new course for the new generation writers. The question may be asked, what is the, it looks vague, sort of, that what course am I charting for them? Yes, new themes, but the new themes cannot come in abstraction. They have to come from society. So looking at that, I have streamlined the topic to look this way now. You are sick. Representation of Nigerians' trouble in the literary works of post-colonial novelists. This is what I have structured the topic to be now. And the you are sick concept comes from bringing out element, identify the kind of ailment that Nigeria is confronted with and preferring solutions. Again, rather than looking at novels from those 3 authors, the investigation is going to be in 6 novels, 2 from each of these authors. Now, but the problem I have with this now is how to articulate the argument of this glaring sociopolitical problems in Nigeria. If we're saying that Nigeria is sick and the ailment has been identified as insecurity, poor governance, all the sociopolitical issues that we're familiar with as a country, I have an issue of how to articulate this argument to be able to come up with the problem Nigeria is confronted with. Thank you very much,
Okay,
Prof.
Thank you so much for that. So my worry with your project is similar to my concerns with Dr. Longdead's project, in that it's very broad at the moment, in terms of the topic. So you'll definitely need to fine tune the topic. But even though when we get into the text itself, you're specific that you're looking at these three writers, and I understand what you want to do with them. My major worry is that it's not clear to me what the original contribution is, because these are scholars that have received a lot of attention. They are literally books, in addition to many articles that talk about, I mean, Achebe, there's probably entire shelves of books that look at his work. Probably less so Iyai and Habila, but ultimately all three of them have received a lot of scholarly attention. So anybody assessing these will struggle to see what exactly is your original intervention in this conversation, because the danger here is, if assuming you got the fellowship and you got funding and you wrote this work, once you finish it, you will struggle to find somebody to publish it, because many people would tell you, look, this has already been done over and over again. So I think in your shoes, I would try two things. One is I would narrow down to a specific socio-political issue, because I think you want to deal with a whole lot of these issues that are haunting Nigeria. I would narrow down to one specific issue, because that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is I would also probably find other authors to work with. And I'm not saying that nobody can write about Achebe or Iyai or Habila right now. What I'm saying is, for you to write about these three, you need to find a very fresh angle to be able to do work on them. So it's not the same as it's finished now, there's no more to say about them. It is to say that one has to, you need a very unique angle to be able to say something fresh. And at the moment, you don't have that unique angle. I'll give an example. I'm sure everybody in the room knows about CLR James. CLR James, the Caribbean thinker, and he's got a book called The Black Jacobins. Let me type that out. Okay, so I've typed the title on the chat. So CLR James is a Caribbean scholar, and he's got a famous book called The Black Jacobins, which is about the Haitian Revolution. And if you just Google that book, you will find dozens of other books that are responding to his particular book. But recently, somebody else did a book about what we enjoyed is they were asking completely fresh questions about this book. And one of the questions they were asking, for instance, is, what do we do with the fact that by the time CLR James is writing, because he writes The Black Jacobins in the early 1920s, and so at that point in world history, he's very optimistic about what the future looks like. He's a Marxist thinker. Marxism as a theory holds so much promise. But for this scholar who is reading CLR James after 2000, he tells us he finds himself now with a new set of problems, because
also to examine sufficiency of funds in Almajiri model schools in North Central geopolitical zones, and to determine the enrollment, transition, and completion of pupils in Almajiri model geopolitical zone. We also want to ascertain the maintenance culture among Almajiri model schools in North Central geopolitical zone. We also want to investigate the strengths of staff in Almajiri model schools in the zone. We also want to examine the adequacy of public enlightenment and social mobilization for effectiveness of Almajiri model schools in North Central geopolitical zone. We also want to evaluate the monitoring, supervision, quality control in Almajiri model school in North Central geopolitical zone. You see, before now, we have Almajiri schools spread throughout northern Nigeria. As far as we are concerned, history has it. For example, Fafua in 1975 postulated that by the time the colonialists came into Nigeria, they were able to identify about 128,000 of such schools spread throughout northern Nigeria. And theirs is not tilted to Western education. Their own education is tilted to Eastern education, the Islamic education, Quranic education. Every parent wants his child to be educated in this form. And this system flow
scholarship on, as well as scholarship on house so that it was
all right.
Speaking to the or book, they have to be book you're converting from a PhD, but it's possible to have definition and it's a bad book.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. We have 2 minutes, but still can go the last one, and we can resume. Speak up. Do we have anybody that okay, still with Ngo and Sun? Is any of you here? Dr. Nogo? And no? Okay, so we are missing 2 of our members. They're with us today. So I suppose we finished early then, but I'm hoping they'll be able to join us tomorrow. So in which case we have some 12 or so minutes for any questions or comments that, and you can give feedback to each other as well, because we are all scholars in the room. So you put for somebody a recommendation, something to read, or how to reframe their project. Anybody? Or a general question for me, either about this afternoon or about the morning's conversation.
Okay.
Yes, slightly, Dr. Longbest. Do you want to lean towards your microphone?
What I had in mind to do is to turn the thesis to a book. The project is actually targeting that book. Now, I'm already of fine-tuning the topic. And as part of the data that I collected, I think I collected up to 200 stories, but I worked with 100 during the PhD doctoral work. So I still want to reread this. At a point, I was thinking, okay, just let's go the 100 and then see how you could actually thematize the analysis. Now, the question I have to ask is, if I narrow it down to maybe a specific theme, will that give me a coverage for a book? Will it be justifiable to work towards a book when it's narrow? Because I actually also had that confusion. Since I'm thinking of having a book at the end of the day, thematizing it or streamlining it to just an issue, will it be enough? And actually that was what led me to come up with the word, the African worldview, which I know already is too broad, but I felt maybe looking at different worldviews that are in the tales. But if I try to do a rethink now and streamline it, will I still have enough scope to come up with a book?
Yes.
So that's my...
Okay, I see what you're asking.
Yes.
Okay. I think I would, if you have a book in mind, I would go with maybe 2 or 3 thematic strands, because so the structure of a book is normally very different from the structure of a thesis, because with a thesis, a lot of the time, especially one that involves field work, you would have what do you call it? You would have the introduction, then you'd have overview and all of that. Then you would have maybe a chapter on methodology, then a chapter on theoretical framework, then a chapter on literature review. So all of those are chapters. And then you would have in many fieldwork related PhDs. And then in terms of actual analysis, you'd have an analysis chapter, then you'd have a findings chapter, then you'd have the conclusion. So if your PhD was structured like that, it's very different from a book, because with a book, on average, you would have probably 4 core chapters and then an introduction and a conclusion. So when you're proposing a book, it's a good idea to think in terms of 4 core chapters, intro and conclusion. You can get away with 3, but that feels a bit thin. So a lot of the time, typically books have 4. If you look at many monographs in literary studies, they would tend to have an introduction, 4 or 5 chapters, and then a conclusion. Again, more than 5, it tends to be towards a very big book that's not very wieldy. So a lot of the time, on average, it's 4 to 5 chapters. So I would aim for 4, in which case then work backwards with your content and ask yourself, and bear in mind that in a book, you don't have a chapter called theoretical framework. You don't have a chapter called literature review. They're all blended together. So that really condenses things. So I think in your shoes, I would then go with maybe 2 sub-themes, 2 or 3 sub-themes. That would give me enough material to be able to generate, on average, plus minus 4 argument chapters, because that's what you're looking at. Does that make, I hope that answers your question. Okay. Although you are on mute, so I'm reading your lips. But yeah, I think...
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm grateful. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, I'm glad. Anybody else with a question or a comment? Anybody? Okay, then that means we have 6 spare minutes. So my understanding is that when we leave the room, we will go back to the main room. So I wouldn't, but our IT host is here. Maybe he can guide us. Are you able to advise us? Can you hear us, IT admin? Okay, so yes, please, Danga, can you unmute yourself and speak, or you want to type it in the chat? Jamie, do you want to unmute yourself and speak before we are kicked out? Or maybe you can type out on the chat room. Okay. So your thesis title is Colonial Firearms Call, Iba Province 1903 to 1960. I'm guessing it's history. Okay, go ahead. Still new books coming out on Atlantic slavery, which basically ended in the late 19th century. So it's really a question of, can you find something fresh to say? Okay, so I think we're being sent back to the main meeting room. I think we're being sent back to the main meeting room, or we've already been migrated back or something like that. So, so I hope I answered your question, Jimmy Udanga, but yeah, don't feel pressured to work with a contemporary topic, and anybody else as well. So long as you can signal what is original about your topic, there's no pressure to do something contemporary. Okay, then I'll see you in the other room. I see we're being relocated.